All right. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, good afternoon, depending on when you are watching this. In our fellowship, once a month, we very slowly work through the book of Revelation. We've been doing this since winter of 2018, so well over a year now. Very slowly for a couple of reasons. One, it's just unfortunate that a lot of people have been taught some really poor ways of reading this book. And actually, kind of in my experience, people have been the recipient of two extremes. Either they avoid the book of Revelation completely because they don't understand it or they're afraid of it, or they make it the entirety of their theology in a way that is uneven and abusive. And both of those extremes need to be avoided. And so the approach that I've taken has been to attempt as responsibly as I can to situate the book in its original context, which is that it is written to 7 churches in Asia Minor, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Laodicea, Sardis, all of those. And then realize that as Christian scripture, like any other book of the Bible, it has application for us today. And so, but in order to understand that application, you have to situate it in its context first and realize what was this vision trying to do for those first century communities that were struggling with being faithful Christians, faithful followers of Jesus in the midst of a culture that was encouraging emperor worship and compromise and sinful behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So if it looks like we're just kind of jumping in the middle of it, that's because we've been working on this very slowly for a long time. So if this is new to you, then I encourage you to check out the YouTube page where we have a full playlist of all of our previous videos, or to just write in and ask some questions. So without further ado, we're going to move on to our PowerPoint. We're only going to look at a short section today, which is the first 5 verses of chapter 14. This is not a really common teaching. Let me move that. Okay. You don't get too many people teaching on the first 5 verses. It's not something that happens very often. I can move that over there. That's good. All right. So, but I was really surprised at how applicable.
Hey, Dustin.
Yes.
We're seeing your presenter view rather than.
Okay. I'm sorry. Let's go to. Okay. Is it better now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I was really surprised at how applicable these 5 verses are. And I think by the end of it, you're just going to see that the application for Christians, regardless of whenever you live and regardless of wherever you live, just jumps off the page. And just you can't help but seeing that this is a powerful passage that sets the standard very high for how the faithful followers of Jesus are to live. Okay, so I entitled this the 144,000 followers of the Lamb, and I put 144,000 in, brackets there because as we've already seen in chapter 7, 144,000 is just a symbolic number of the completeness and the fulfillment of the people of God, and it's not an actual round number. Obviously, there's more than 144,000 believers. But that's the symbolic number that Revelation uses to describe them as the people in their perfection and the people in fulfillment of the purposes of God. Okay, so let's move on. We're just going to look at the first 5 verses of chapter 14. And it says, "Then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder, and the voice which I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. These are the ones who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb, and no lie was found in their mouth. They are blameless. So we have an initial description of the 144,000. We have a worship scene, and then we have a multi-part description. There's 7 descriptions in verses 4 through 5. That's probably not a surprise that there's 7 of them that describe the behavior and the characteristics of this group of people. So let's look at each of these verses in detail. Okay, it's actually important that when you set these passages in their context, you have to realize that this section, the first 5 verses here, has come after an entire chapter where we've looked at not one beast, but 2 beasts. We've seen the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. I've also given the spoilers that the beast in the land is later described as the false prophet. So when you look at this description, it seems that there's some pretty easy to see comparisons and even contrast with our previous teachings. I'm trying to just remind us what we've looked at so far, and to see, again, if you were hearing this for the first time, what sort of feelings and descriptions would you have, have inside yourself? First thing I note is that those who participate in emperor worship, in any capacity of emperor worship, are identified with the number 666. We saw that last time. But those who follow the Lamb wherever they go are identified with the number 144,000. So the question is, do you want to be associated with an imperfect 6 or with complete numbers 12 and 1,000? And that's when you look at the number 144,000, you need to look at that as multiples of 12 and multiples of 1,000, because 12 times 12 is 144. And of course, you have lots of multiples of 1,000 that are there. Okay, so that's how the numbers function. Okay, numbers are symbolic. And so do you want to be associated with the group of 666, or do you want to be associated with the group 144,000? Okay, so that's a question you would have, really just based on kind of like the last 15 verses. Okay, we have the defeated dragon stands upon both the sea and the land, which are realms that are in need of redemption in chapter 13, verse 1. But the Lamb stands upon Mount Zion, which is a city of refuge and messianic kingship. Which of these animals do you want to follow? Okay, you want to follow the animal that is standing upon lands that are in need of redemption, the sea and the land, or do you want to follow the Lamb that is standing on Mount Zion? Okay, pretty easy choice. The evil beast offer the mark of the beast, while the faithful bear the mark of the Lamb and his Father. With whom do you desire to be identified, and whom do you desire to serve? Okay, easy choice for us. And then the beast from the land is later unveiled to be the false prophet, but the followers of the Lamb do not have falsehood in their mouth. By the way, this is a reference to Jesus' behavior on the cross. Jesus on the cross did not have falsehood or deceit in his mouth. Which of the two would you like to follow? Okay, so to me it seems pretty clear that when you read this small section, first 5 verses of chapter 14, and you see that it comes right after the descriptions of the 2 beasts in chapter 13, there's some pretty clear ethical contrast. Okay, so which ones do you want to be associated with? Which ones would you like to follow? Okay, and I don't think that's an accident. I think that the placement of our passage right after chapter 13 is very deliberate and calls us to really think about and to consider with which of these animals do we want to be identified. Okay, So let's move on. Let's look at each verse and just kind of break them apart. I put the verses up at the top, just kind of for your reference. So 14 verse 1, where John looked, behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, with him the 144,000, and they had the name of him, his name, and his father written on their foreheads. Okay. Now one might expect the lamb to be seated, since he is enthroned at God's right hand, but the vision depicts the lamb standing. It's very interesting, okay? And this indicates the triumphal resurrected state as well as a figure ready for action, okay? Countering the standing stance of the dragon that stands upon the sea and the land. That's back in chapter 13 and verse 1, okay? It's actually very rare that you will find the resurrected Jesus who is at the right hand of God standing. I can only think of 3 references in the Bible altogether. I think Stephen's speech in Acts chapter 7, Jesus is envisioned there as standing, almost like he's standing up in appreciation for the martyrdom of Stephen. And then Jesus is depicted as standing twice in the book of Revelation. And it's because he's the slaughtered lamb who is also standing. It's a vision of the crucified and resurrected Jesus. Both of those images are kind of compounded there. Okay, so Jesus is standing on Mount Zion. But Mount Zion, by the way, is a poetic reference to Jerusalem. Maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't, that in the Old Testament, when you read about Zion, it's just another way of describing Jerusalem. Of course, the location is Jerusalem. Zion is just kind of the way that the poets and the prophets like to describe it. And it's a location that draws upon images of rescue for the faithful remnant, okay? You'll find in the Old Testament the phrase Mount Zion 19 times, and in 9 of them, 9 out of 19, which is almost 50%, it appears as a reference to rescue for the faithful remnant. So let me just kind of give you some of those references here. Again, this is the type of imagery from the Old Testament that Revelation is drawing upon, and hopefully its readers would have picked these things out as they would have heard this vision for the first time. So in 2 Kings 19, it says, "For out of Jerusalem will go forth a remnant, and out of Mount Zion survivors." Okay, so notice there that Jerusalem and Mount Zion are synonyms, and out of them are described a remnant and survivors, meaning that it's a city of refuge for the faithful remnant and the survivors. Psalm 125 verse 1 says, "Those who trust in Yahweh are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever." Okay, notice that there the people are described as a city. The people basically are a city. They're immovable and they're going to last forever. Okay, but they have to be the ones that trust. They have to be the trustworthy, the faithful, and they are described as a city. Yahweh will create over the whole area of Mount Zion and over her assemblies, a cloud by day, even smoke, and the brightness of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory will be a canopy, and there will be a shelter to give shade from the heat of day, and refuge and protection from the storm and the rain. Okay, so again, you can see the imagery there in Isaiah chapter 4 of Mount Zion as a place of refuge and protection. And then Obadiah, only one chapter, verse 17 says, "But on Mount Zion there will be those who escape." Okay, so the point is, by Revelation drawing on this imagery of Mount Zion and saying that the Lamb is standing on Mount Zion, and with the Lamb, obviously on Mount Zion are the 144,000, we see that that is a place of refuge. It's a place of protection. It's a place for the faithful people of God. And of course, as we've seen, it is a counter location to the land and the sea, which are places, realms in need of redemption. Obviously, Mount Zion is a place for the redeemed, okay? So if that's a good place, you want to be there. We want to be associated with this image. You want to read yourself into this vision. All right. All right. In fact, it was already possible to allude to, quote, believers coming to Mount Zion as a present spiritual experience. We already see this, by the way, in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 22, where the writer says, "You have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. It's interesting there. He describes it kind of not as the real Jerusalem, not as the location of Jerusalem, but as kind of this new Jerusalem, as this kind of spiritual experience of Mount Zion. And of course, Revelation describes the citizenship of the faithful as those who are citizens of New Jerusalem, despite the fact that they actually would get their mail delivered to them in the 7 cities of Asia Minor. Okay, so we're talking about a spiritual city. We're talking about a spiritual identification, a spiritual citizenship. And the thing is, what Revelation is demonstrating is something that has already been shown in the New Testament. Of course, I already talked about Psalm 125, verse 1, where the faithful people are described as Mount Zion. Okay, now those who bear the identifying marks of the Lamb and his Father are called the 144,000. Okay, so notice in the verse that we have with the Lamb are the 144,000, and they have his name, the name of the Lamb and the name of his Father on their forehead. Okay, all right, and this, by the way, it proves that the 144,000 are not non-Christian Jews. Okay. It's sometimes popular to teach that the 144,000 are non-Christians. But here you can see that the 144,000 have the name of the Lamb written on their foreheads. That means they're identified with the Lamb. They're Lamb followers. They're Christians. Okay? 144,000 are not non-Christians. They are exactly Christians. But Revelation's already revealed that the 144,000 is a symbolic number representing the multitude of those who have washed their robes with the blood of the Lamb. That's what it says in chapter 7, verses 13 through 14. You can reference that passage. That's the first reference that we have of the 144,000. So this is, by the way, the second reference here in chapter 14. Clearly, the 144,000 are Christian believers. They are mixed believers. Doesn't matter if you're a Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female, that you are identify with the Lamb if you are the 144,000. But again, 144,000 is not an exact number. It's a symbolic number because it's a combination of 12 and 1,000 references to completeness and fulfillment in the purposes of God. Okay, now being identified as 144,000 has 2 discernible meanings. First, it is a direct counter to those who are marked by the beast with the triply incomplete 666. Okay, number 6 is 1 short of 7. 7 is a number of completion. You don't want to be associated with a triply incomplete number. You want to be associated with complete numbers like 12 and 1,000 or multiples thereof. Second, it regards the faithful as complete and in fulfillment of the plans of God with several multiples of 12 and 1,000. Note here, by the way, okay, putting my cards on the table for future teachings, note how the faithful in this life are again identified with the number 1,000 or multiples thereof. And of course, this imagery is going to reappear again. Okay, so I'm just pointing that out there, that the people of God are identified with the number 1,000 and multiples thereof in this life already. And that's how Revelation is using its numerical imagery. Okay, so we can move on from there. I think we can, that's right, we need to talk about the Father. Okay, so Revelation, by the way, seems to go out of its way to remind its readers that God is the Father of the Lamb. Okay, so notice in our passage here, notice that they have his name, that's the name of the Lamb, and the name of his Father. Okay, clearly we know that the Father of the Lamb is God, but it words it in a way here to remind us that the Lamb has a Father, that Father is God, and that Father is the one who's seated on the throne. Okay, now normally the Father is the one who is seated on the throne, but here he is defined more clearly as the Lamb's Father. Now us as Unitarians, we already know this. This is common knowledge for us. We know that the Father of the Lamb is God, and God is the Father of Jesus. Now, but set within the Greco-Roman world that was filled with emperor worship, the title Father was quite regularly used to describe the reigning Caesar, the reigning emperor. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't know that it was very common to describe Caesar or the emperor with the title Father. And this was very, very common. And so when Christians in the New Testament are saying, actually, there's only one Father who is the true God, that is not just a compliment to our theology of who God is. It is also a jab at those who worship the emperor to say, actually, the person that you think is the Father really isn't. He's a fake. He's not even, they think that the emperor is God. So I'll give you a couple of quotes here from relevant sources. Dio Cassius was a historian. He said, the title Father of his country, this is Tiberius, he did not object to hearing it spoken or reading it when written. And whenever he sent messages to kings, he would regularly include this title in his letters. Okay, so there we have a relevant historian who said that the emperor would actually include the title Father of his country in his letters to kings. Okay, Augustus, who after Caesar was the first emperor, in his own autobiography said, quote, "While I was administering my 13th consulship, the Senate and the equestrian order and the entire Roman people gave me the title Father of my country." Okay, so notice this is not something that the emperor is just saying, hey, I'm the father. This is something that the people are conferring upon him. The people want to laud him with this title of the Father. And then Suetonius, who's a Latin historian, writing on the life of Augustus, said the whole body of citizens, with a sudden unanimous impulse, proffered him the title of Father of his country. Okay, so we have lots of evidence there from ancient historians and even from Augustus himself that the title Father was a regular title for the Roman emperor. So when Revelation actually says that the Father is really the Father of the Lamb, it's not just a theological category, it is an anti-imperial theological claim. It is an anti-Caesar claim. And also the emperor's title, Father, was inscribed in inscriptions that have survived in Ephesus, Smyrna, and Thyatira. You can actually go to these ancient places and you can see those inscriptions still there. It's a common title. All right, let's move on to verse 2. So we see the voice from heaven, sound from heaven, many waters, sound of loud thunder, and then we have lots and lots of people that are playing harps in air quotes. So while situated on earth, presumably among the 144,000 on Mount Zion, John hears many powerful sounds coming out of heaven. He hears many waters. By the way, that was formerly used of Jesus' voice in chapter 1 and verse 15. He hears loud thunder, formerly used to describe the throne of God in chapter 4 and verse 5, and the sound of many harps. Okay, so he's hearing all of these different sounds and voices coming out of heaven. Okay? This, by the way, is a coin showing you the type of harp that they used in the first century. Okay? Now, these harps are actually ancient kitharas. That's how you would say it. It's a kithara. And they should not be confused with our modern harps used in the 21st century. You can actually look at this picture of a harp, and it looks kind of like a harp that we might think, but you could see actually it's a little bit different, okay? The normal harps that we have today kind of have three sides, and they have just a bunch of, obviously a bunch of strings, but this one looks different. It's got a music box. It's kind of attached to the bottom. It's very, very different. An ancient kithara, the types of harps that are being referred to in our passage and in the New Testament, are not the same types of harps that we use in our modern times. In fact, the Greek word that's used is kithara. Okay, now here's an example of a kithara from the Jewish coin dated to 132 AD. And there's much evidence to show that Greeks and Romans used the kithara to honor their gods. There's actually no indication that early Christians ever used this instrument, either in their church settings or privately. And I thought this is interesting. So Revelation seems to transform an instrument that was used for pagan worship into one that now celebrates the work of God and the Lamb. Okay, so this is my point. You would be reading this. Let's say you were a first century Christian that lived in Ephesus. You would be reading this imagery from the book of Revelation. You would see, okay, I've got the sound of harpists playing their harps, which is really playing the kithara. And you would think to yourself, well, this doesn't sound like a Christian image because Christians don't play the harp. That's not something that we play in our worship ceremonies. We don't use this in our churches. Who do use the harps? Well, it's these Greeks and these Romans. They use it in their temples. They use it, in their festivals. The point is, it's not a Christian instrument. But you see what Revelation does? It takes a non-Christian pagan instrument and it transforms it into something that is now involved in the celebration of God and the Lamb. It is now part of the heavenly worship chorus. Okay? Here's another image of a harp, of a kithara, excuse me. This was actually an image of Apollo who was playing the kithara, and this is dated to the 5th century BC. Okay? Now, outside the book of Revelation, the only New Testament reference to a kithara is where Paul speaks of the effect of tongues without interpretation in 1 Corinthians 14. Paul says, "But now, brethren, if I come to you speaking in tongues, what will I profit you unless I speak to you either by way of revelation or of knowledge or of prophecy or of teaching? Yet even lifeless things, either flute or harp, in producing a sound, if they do not produce a distinction in its tones, how will it be known what is played on the flute or on the harp?" 1 Corinthians 14, verse 6 through 7. So outside of Revelation, that is the only occurrence of this phrase. And you can see that Paul just kind of uses it in a reference to talk about what it would be like if someone spoke in tongues, but there was no interpretation. It doesn't help us. It would be like a harp that has no distinction of tunes. I mean, he uses it kind of like as a casual reference. Okay? The point is that the harp is not a common Christian instrument. It's just so rarely used. This is the only occurrence of the phrase outside of the book of Revelation. So in short, Revelation has taken an instrument used in celebration of Greek and Roman gods, and it has included it in heavenly worship of the true God. It just seems kind of interesting, and why harp would have just kind of struck original readers as something that's kind of out of place. Okay, moving on to verse 3, where they sing a new song before the throne, before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn this song except for the 144,000. By the way, reminds you that they're the ones who've been purchased from the earth. Now, it's difficult to situate where we, as readers of Revelation, are located in this passage. Initially, we were on Mount Zion, by the way of reference to New Jerusalem. And now we seem to be listening to a new song that is sung by harpists before the throne of God. Where is the throne of God? Well, the throne of God is in heaven. How can it be that Revelation places its audience both on Zion and in heaven? It seems that for this vision, both are true at the same time. The vision situates the faithful in a triumphal and protected position of Zion as citizens of New Jerusalem, while participating in the worship of heaven. Now, as a reminder, Paul had extraordinary visions that elevated him to the third heaven. You can see that in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 1 through 2. Visionary experiences, therefore, blur the distinction between heaven and earth. Okay? So obviously, John was located on heaven, but within this visionary trance experience, he is experiencing what it's like to no longer be on the island of Patmos, but be on this spiritual Mount Zion, but also spiritually situated to where he is hearing the worship that is taking place before the throne, which is in heaven. So it's all of these experiences that are shaping his vision and orienting how he should be thinking and how he should be living. Okay? So we should not have our head explode when we can't figure out, okay, but where are we? Where are we exactly? I want to know where we are. I think that misses the point. Just allow the vision to kind of situate you and allow you to feel, all of the images that are taking place. And just experience this vision along with John. And so we see a new song here. And by the way, a new song is a theme that is used in a number of biblical psalms. But Psalm 144 in particular celebrates the God who gives victory and rescues the faithful people of God. So I think actually that in our context here, Psalm 144 is likely the passage that's being drawn upon. I'll quote a little bit of it here. Psalm 144, verses 9 through 11, where the psalmist says, I will sing a new song to you, O God. Upon a harp of 10 strings, I will sing praises to you, who gives salvation to kings, who rescues David, his servant, from the evil sword. And then the psalmist prays and says, rescue me and deliver me out of the hand of aliens, whose mouth speaks deceit and whose right hand is the right hand of falsehood. Psalm 144, verses 9 through 11. And so it's noteworthy to see the similar themes in our present passage's context. We have the new song, we have the harp, we have a scene of worship, we have the recalling of how God rescues and saves those who are faithful, because the 144,000 are seated on Mount Zion. We have the subsequent request for rescue and deliverance, specifically from those who speak deceitfully and who do what is false. And we just got done seeing a vision of the false prophet. So I think it's very likely that he is drawing upon the imagery of Psalm 144 in his reference to a new song in the depiction of this particular vision. You can see lots of themes there. And notice the 144,000, who, by the way, are clarified in our passage as having been purchased from the earth. The earth there is the realm of the unredeemed. We have been purchased from the earth. They are the only ones who can understand this new song. Now, if you look up at the top in the yellow, it says that no one could learn the song except the 144,000. But the verb to learn is the verbal form of the noun where we get the word disciple. Okay, we all know what a disciple is. A disciple is a learner. Okay, but the word learn in Greek doesn't just mean like learn knowledge. It also means to understand what you've learned. A disciple is someone who learns from Jesus, but also understands what Jesus has said. So the verb here to learn, a lot of commentators says that it really has the meaning of learning and understanding. So only the 144,000 can understand this new song, this heavenly song that's taking place. So I'm wondering here, perhaps this is a marching song with a cadence that only is known by the true conquerors, because as we're going to see in the rest of our passage, there is a military conqueror kind of theme that is taking place in these 5 verses. But that seems to be the purpose. We got this new song, but only the faithful, only the 144,000 can learn and understand what it is. And of course, these 144,000 are the ones that have been redeemed. We have been purchased. We have been bought back from the slave market. Okay, so everything up to this point has just been just kind of initial descriptions, but now we actually get the images that give us application as to how we can live in our life, okay? And I fully admit that, hey, these first 5 verses, yeah, they're a little weird. They're a little strange. I get that, okay? But there's a lot of beauty in poetry, and I want us to appreciate that, because it is God-breathed, inspired poetry, and we should honor that. All right, so verse 4. These are the 140,000. These are the ones who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. Okay, so the 144,000 are described with 5 ethical images, and each of these offers practical application for readers of Revelation to deeply consider. So I'm going to draw out of these practical application for what they meant for the original readers and what they mean for us today. Okay, so the first description says, not defiled with women. Okay, and this description, by the way, it's been read literally, and it's been deemed misogynistic unfairly. Okay, there are a lot of feminist readers of Revelation that have read this passage that says, oh, so you're saying that women defile men. That sounds very sexist. That sounds very misogynistic. That's a reading that's too literal. It's unfair. And I don't think that the writer of Revelation was unloving towards women. But you could see how reading this from a feminist perspective, could make women feel very, set aside and unloved. And I don't think that's what the passage is actually doing. Since Revelation depicts the faithful as conquerors, then the quote-unquote battle imagery needs to be taken into account. And if you recall from the Old Testament, soldiers that go out to war were actually to abstain from sexual relations. And I'm just going to give you 2 passages here. There are more that we can see, but 2 are enough to kind of make the point. Deuteronomy chapter 23 says, when you go out as an army against your enemies, you shall keep yourself from every evil thing. If there is among you any man who is unclean because of nocturnal emission, then he must go outside the camp. He may not re-enter the camp. Okay. Point is that people that have participated in relations with their wives, they're not allowed to participate in the army. Okay. Mainly because I think that God wanted people to have an undivided attention to their mission. 1 Samuel, when David himself, who is part of a military campaign, when he comes and he talks to the priest, he says to them, surely women have been kept from us, from him and his military camp, as previously when I set out and the vessels of the young men were holy. Okay, so the point is, soldiers in the Old Testament were to abstain from sexual relations. In Revelation, the faithful people of God are described as conquerors. And so the imagery of not being defiled actually describes our conqueror status. Let me give a little bit more information here. So along with the military and conqueror imagery, the abstaining from defilement of women recalls the letter to Sardis. This is in Revelation chapter 3, where the only other occurrence of the verb melino, which is where we get the word defiled, appears in Revelation. So when we recall this passage out of Revelation 3 and verse 4, the only other occurrence where we have this phrase defiled, where it says, you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled, that's our verb, soiled their garments, and they walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Now there in Sardis, to soil their garments does not mean that they couldn't make it to the bathroom in time. To soil their garments means that they have compromised their faithfulness, their holiness, their purity with the outside world, with sin, with false worship, with emperor worship. They've compromised themselves. They're no longer pure. Okay, so notice there that to be defiled means to be soiled with compromise and false worship. Okay, has nothing to do with women being inherently evil. Moreover, the false prophetess Jezebel in Thyatira encouraged the faithful to compromise. And the quote from Revelation 2:20 says that she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so they will commit acts of fornication and eat things sacrificed to idols. Okay, so there you can see the quote-unquote defilement by a woman. The woman there is a teacher there who calls herself a prophetess. John calls her a false prophetess. She's false because she encourages compromise. She says it's okay for you to commit acts of fornication and to eat things sacrificed to idols, okay? So the defilement of that woman is compromising with sin, with false worship, and allowing yourself to go to the temples and to eat meat that has been sacrificed to the emperor, okay? Christians are true conquerors. We're not to be defiled in this way. So here's our application. What does it mean for us to not be quote unquote defiled by women? It doesn't mean that women are evil. The imagery, therefore, the faithful refrain from the defilement of women by conquering as Jesus conquered in their refusal to compromise with illicit worship and unfaithful deeds of disobedience. The bride of Christ is called to be pure and holy. So we must encourage each other to remain faithful and to refuse compromise. By doing so, we will not be defiled. Okay? Now notice there, the phrase not being defiled with women, it kind of, if you read it literally, it assumes that the 144,000 are actually males. There's kind of an assumption there. But of course, you wouldn't read that literally. We know that the imagery of Revelation, when you read it literally, we distort it. Okay? We have to keep that in mind when we look at the next image, where it says, quote, they have kept themselves chaste. Okay? But the phrase literally means, in Greek, for they are virgins. And if you have a New Revised Standard or an English Standard Version, it's going to translate it literally. But my NASB says they have kept themselves chaste. The literal translation is that they are virgins. So now we actually have two images that are impossible to be understood literally. It is impossible to be a male defiled by women and also a female virgin. Okay? Because virgins in every occurrence of the Bible, without exception, are always females. The word virgin is actually a feminine noun. Okay, do you see this? Do you see what I'm trying to point out? Is that if you read this imagery literally, which is the fault of a lot of poor readings of the book of Revelation, you have something that you can't reconcile. You can't at the same time be a male defiled by women and be a female virgin. It just doesn't make sense, okay? These are images. It's poetry, okay? So we have to ask, what does the image recall? What sort of description does it give us? And how does it describe the people of God? Clearly, virgins, quote unquote, must have a symbolic meaning for the 144,000. And by the way, the virgins include males and married couples. And most married couples are not virgins, okay? Now, Paul, by the way, describes the female bride of Christ as a virgin. This is what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 2. Paul says, I betroth you to one husband, so that to Christ I might present you as a pure virgin. Okay? So even before we even get to the book of Revelation, the body of Christ is described as a virgin, as a female, and one that is pure. We know that our husband in the covenant marriage is Christ. Our relationship is to Christ. We are faithful to Christ when we honor him and his teachings. We are an unfaithful bride. We tarnish and we defile our purity and our virginity when we are unfaithful to Christ. Okay, you get this? Like, Revelation's not teaching us anything brand new. This is stuff that's already been talked about in the letters of Paul. For Revelation's readers, the faithful are called to embody the female imagery of a pure woman betrothed to Christ. Christ is the husband. So look at how Revelation uses this particular imagery. In chapter 19, Revelation says, let us rejoice and be glad and give the glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Who is the bride? We are the bride. How do we make ourselves ready? It was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. As John has carefully helped us to understand, righteous acts are acts, deeds, works that are in loyalty to the covenant. They are the acts, the righteous acts that are required to us in that covenant relationship. okay? So the bright clothes, the bright robes that we wear in Revelation, they're not about actual clothing. They are our faithful deeds, our righteous acts, our good works. That's what it says in Revelation. So again, that describes the bride. But look at how the bride is also described in chapter 21. The angel says, come here, I'm going to show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And what did he show me? He carried me away in the city to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. Well, wait a minute. Which one is it? Are we the bride, the wife of the Lamb, or are we a city? Which one is it? Because you can't be both those things at the same time. And Revelation says, actually, yes, you can. You can be described as the bride of Christ right now, and you can be described as New Jerusalem right now. Is New Jerusalem an actual city? No, it's a symbolic city that describes the people of God, the bride of Christ, the church. And in the description of that city, it says, nothing unclean and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it. But the word it is a feminine pronoun, meaning shall ever come into her. What is the her? Is the her the bride, or is the her the city? Well, it's the same thing. The word city, polis, in Greek is also feminine. So notice there, no one is able to come into the bride of Christ who is unclean, who practices abomination, who is a liar. You can't come into it. Why? Because the bride of Christ is pure. We keep ourselves chaste. We are described with the imagery of virginity. That's the imagery there. I mean, it's pretty clear to see like the practical application of this. Folks, we got to keep ourselves pure. We got to be holy. We got to be God-honoring in our purity, in our devotion to Christ, in our obedience, in our faithful deeds. It's easy to see, but it's much more powerful when you use all of this imagery, this poetry. It's very powerful. So the application for this is that we need to take away is that the description of the 144,000 is an image of a faithful bride of Christ. Our marriage with Christ is bound in terms of the new covenant, which stipulates how we are to live in faithfulness to the Lamb. To live unfaithfully to the Lamb's commands would be to soil our pure virginity. We are called, therefore, to remain pure in our obedience to the Lamb and to avoid acts of fornication. What does it mean to fornicate? Worshiping anything other than the Lamb and his Father. Sinful behavior, identifying with the nation to the neglect of our citizenship with the New Jerusalem, which is the bride, okay? Our true citizenship is there in New Jerusalem, okay? So that's what it means to keep ourselves chaste, to keep ourselves as virgins. Okay. Verse 14 also says that we are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Luckily for us, this is easy. This is an easy one to see. The phrase, the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, is unmistakably the call to discipleship that is frequent in the four Gospels, okay? In the four Gospels, that's what they do. They drop what they're doing and they follow Jesus. The call for Jesus is to believe the gospel and follow me. It also offers an all-encompassing view of what our obedience should look like. The Lamb is our model rather than the sea beast or his false prophet, okay? The beast, that's not our model. False prophet, we don't follow the false prophet. We follow after the Lamb. We follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Specifically, Revelation has placed Jesus as an example to follow in three key areas. These are the three things that made up the essence of my doctoral dissertation, Revelation. Number one is that Jesus was a faithful witness of the gospel of the kingdom. To be a faithful witness is someone who preaches the gospel as a faithful witness to it. Number two, Jesus demonstrated nonviolent endurance and perseverance, meaning that he endured, he persevered, he had steadfastness, he didn't give up the faith, and when he came into opposition, he did not respond with violence. And number three, Jesus was fully committed, even if it resulted in his martyrdom. All three of these things, being a faithful witness, having nonviolent endurance / perseverance, and being fully committed, even if it cost you your life, are things that Jesus did in Revelation and are things that are held up for the readers of Revelation to emulate. So, if we are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and the Lamb does these three things, then we need to follow Jesus specifically in these three areas. So what's the application? As for modern readers, we can follow the Lamb by choosing to speak forth the message of the kingdom of God as faithful witnesses in a fallen world. Our loyalty to Jesus is to result in obeying his teachings. And when we face opposition, I'm not even saying if, I'm saying when. Don't think, well, it might happen, it might not happen. Go and just assume that you're going to face some sort of opposition in your life if you're going to be a faithful witness. When this happens, we do not abandon the faith, nor violently fight back, but rather we remain faithful for the rest of our lives. Hopefully, God spares and protects us and we get to live out a long life, but it might cost us our lives. That's what it means to follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Easy to understand, hard to put into practice. Okay, and verse 5 says, no lie was found in their mouth, they are blameless. So let's talk about what does it mean for no lie or no falsehood to be found in their mouth. This is, by the way, a direct reference to Isaiah's suffering servant. He's actually drawing on Isaiah 53 and verse 9, which says of the suffering servant, his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. So this is drawn upon in the New Testament to refer to Jesus on the cross as the one who embodies a suffering servant. And on the cross, he had no violence and there's no deceit in his mouth. And so for us, we are to have no lie or falsehood in our mouth. Unlike the false prophet, followers of the Lamb do not have lies or false things in their mouth because their leader set the example. Jesus didn't have any deceit or falsehood in his mouth, so we don't have any lie found in our mouth. In fact, liars are clearly listed among those whose place will be in the lake of fire, according to Revelation 21:8, where it says, but for the cowardly and the unfaithful and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Okay? So liars are just as bad as idolaters, as the unfaithful, as murderers. Okay? Don't think that just by saying a white lie or by holding on to falsehood that you're not as bad as someone who is a murderer. Revelation says liars will have their place in the lake of fire. And we already read that liars cannot enter into New Jerusalem. Okay? So we can't have any lies or falsehood in our mouth. Here's our application. Revelation thus encourages the pure bride of Christ to speak forth truth in the midst of a world that is fed deceit and lies. Our speech is not only to be truthful, but it is also to have an honest integrity. We need to have integrity in our speech. Furthermore, we are to abandon falsehoods and refuse to speak them to others. Okay? It's not just about speaking them. It's like just having them in your mouth. Don't even have them. Okay. And then the last description says they are blameless. Last slide, I promise. They are blameless. Blameless. What does it mean to be blameless? This indicates a stance of those who do not have unrepentant sin in their lives. And I've made this point very clear. To be blameless is not a reference to sinless perfection. Okay, people think, oh, blameless? I can never be blameless because I'm a sinner. To be blameless doesn't mean sinless perfection. God never expects sinless perfection in the Bible. He does call us to be blameless. Rather, the act of blamelessness, indicates someone who is humble enough to repent and change if they find themselves in error, either doctrinal or ethical. One who is blameless is in good standing within the covenant. So what's the application? For modern readers of Revelation, we are called to be blameless in a world that regularly attempts to persuade us to compromise with sin, with an abandonment of our citizenship to New Jerusalem, and to give up our strict worship of God and the Lamb. We must strive to remain blameless as the pure bride of Christ. And we must encourage those around us to live to the standard that describes the redeemed 144,000. We must never compromise our faith for worldly gain. And if we find ourselves in any error, we must be quick to turn from that sin in repentance and confession. So I think that this little passage, 5 verses, is extremely practical for the Christian life. It gives us purpose, it gives us value, and it gives us direction. And hopefully you have found it applicable to your life. Okay, I think I have ended. Oh, I need to get out of the stop sharing. All right. Okay, so let's open some time up for questions or comments.
Dustin, there was a question in the chat. I think it was from Rick. Yeah, Rick wrote, Revelation 7, 4 through 8 speaks of 144,000 drawn equally from the 12 tribes of Israel. What is your interpretation of these passages?
Right, good question. Okay, so very, very quickly, we'll clarify this so we're all on the same page. There's a good question, but there's a very, very, very easy answer to it. Okay, so Rick, I'm going to turn to this passage just so we can kind of see what is going on. Man, this is really bright. Okay, so you have the introduction of the 144,000. You can see in verse 3 of chapter 7 where it says, don't harm the earth or the sea or the tree until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. And we see the number of those who are sealed is 144,000, okay? So we already see the 144,000 are those who are sealed, okay? We've already seen in our present passage that they're sealed with the Lamb, the name of the Lamb, and the name of the Lamb's father. Okay, so we know that the seal of the Lamb means they're identified with the Lamb, means that they are Christians, okay? But we initially see, okay, but if you look in verse 4, and the wording of this is very careful. I heard, with our ear, I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. Then it goes and it gives all the detail of that, okay? And then you see in verse 9, where it says, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes and palm branches in their hands, okay? And so what we see is a way that Revelation likes to define its images is that it will first tell you, you will hear it. I heard the number was 144,000, but then he turns and he looks, and what he sees defines what he just heard. So he heard 144,000 people that were sealed. What he sees is a great multitude that can't be counted of people that are clearly redeemed as Christians. And if there was any question, we already saw in chapter 14 that those who are sealed with the mark of the Lamb, meaning that they're identified with Jesus. So the 144,000 is not a reference to non-Christian Jews. It's a symbolic number for the redeemed people of God, Jews and Gentiles. If that is not persuasive to you, let me know and I will try harder, because I think that's a very, very important point for us to take away from Revelation. Oh, you're muted, but I'm gonna, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments?
I have a question on the back in verse 2 on the harp thing. As you had said that there's a lack of evidence of Christians. I don't remember exactly what you said, using harps. I don't know if it was that you said using harps in their worship, or just a connection between Christians and harps. And I'm curious, is that something that we just don't lack? We lack evidence of, so we don't have anything showing the two connected, or is there some sort of evidence that shows that there was a conscious distinction where Christians were avoiding that?
Yeah, I don't know if Christians were consciously avoiding it. It's just when you come across this depiction where we see that harps are involved in the heavenly worship, that would have struck the original readers as odd, because the harp is not a common Christian instrument. It wasn't used in their worship services. It wasn't used privately. Like I said, the only other reference to it, even in the New Testament, is when Paul talks about it almost kind of flippantly in negative terms. So I'm asking the question as an interpreter: why in the world is this here, and what is the significance of it? Because it's not a common. It's not like the cross, which is a common Christian symbol, or the empty tomb. It hasn't really no bearing to Christianity at all. But it seems to be a very, very common instrument used in pagan worship. And so what Revelation seems to do, I think, is that it reappropriates an instrument used in that way and uses it for Christian purposes. But we have zero evidence of any Christians using it in the first century. I don't think we have any church fathers talking about it in the second century. It just wasn't used. So I don't think it's a negative term. It just
let me ask you part B of my question. In the past, when I've read that verse, the image that's come to mind, and this isn't from actually studying this at all, it's just the image that come to mind is a hearkening back to the worship in the temple with David, and David's use of a harp, that sort of thing. So you don't think that there's a connection here where Revelation?
Well, I do think that. I do think that you will actually find that not only David but priests in the Old Testament are doing that. The problem is that the people that are playing the harps are not the 144,000 in our passage. That's part of the heavenly worship chorus that's going on. So I didn't try to make any kind of connection there. So obviously David did use it. It's not a negative image, but it's not a distinctly Christian image. And so that's probably going on there. But maybe I worded it in a way that made it sound worse than it is, which is not a bad thing. So, but we're in agreement there.
I thought it was funny. I went over and looked at that verse in Greek and saw that it's that word,
Thara.
base word for harp. It uses it's the harpists, which in English is pretty good because you see it, harp and harpist. And then you were saying that the word playing there is the verb form of that. And so it's just interesting because the way that it reads in Greek, harpists harping on harps, on their harps.
Yeah.
And I thought, you probably couldn't translate that into English, harpist harping.
Yeah, because we don't have a verb to harp.
Yeah, it means a whole, harping in English means a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've noticed that. It's just an interesting point. But it's funny because whenever I put together a PowerPoint, I try to find some sort of background image. And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to type in Revelation 14 harp. And almost all the pictures have the wrong harp. They have the modern harp instead of the ancient harp. And I'm like, well, they just don't know the difference there. So none of those pictures work. So I found a picture of 144,000 people. Okay. Thanks for your question. Pereiras have raised their hand.
Yes, Dustin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Dustin, I just wanted to ask a little more clarification on Revelation 7, what you just explained to Rick. That in verse 5, when it says that of the tribe of Judah, 12,000. So even this is symbolic. And like Judah is Judah and all these tribes are symbolic language to show the people of God.
Yeah, it's depicting that the people of God are the fulfillment of Israel. I think that's kind of the theology that's taking place. It's no different than Paul saying that the church is the Israel of God in Galatians 6:16. It's just another way of depicting those sort of things, that the Israel is now described as an innumerable people that are clothed with the blood of Jesus. So, but again, those numbers are symbolic numbers.
I think for me, the compelling part of what you share on that is the hearing and the seeing thing. It's kind of a powerful mechanism of, we're hearing something and then we see the actual thing. And, and I remember you teaching that that's kind of a thing that happens several times in Revelation. And that John will hear it. He'll hear it, and then he looks and sees, and it's not exactly what he heard. And the idea that the representation, that what he saw is the actual thing of what he heard as a representation of that thing. And I think that's really pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a thematic interpretive device in Revelation that what is seen interprets what was previously heard. And so you always want to be on the lookout for hearing and seeing right next to each other. Otherwise, what I just told you is not relevant to Christians at all, which means that I just wasted an hour of my life. But I'm pretty sure this is a reference. It's clearly that they are identified with the Lamb, and it uses all the imagery of the bride of Christ that is applicable to us, that Paul used, and they're followers of the Lamb. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Anyway.
Actually,
okay.
Well, hang on a second. I've let her out of the trunk.
Oh,
She's out of the trunk. See,
that actually was exactly what I was taught for all the years of my life since I was 19 until the last few years. I was raised in the Church of Christ, and they didn't believe what you were saying, that it's not relevant for Christians. But, for many years, the people I hung out with believed that, Revelation is interesting, but, keep in mind that it's not really to you. So this is, I really appreciate, having that corrected.
Those on the video are not going to understand the context of your joke, but that's okay.
No, they won't, but that's okay.
Okay.
They'll just
prayers. Did I answer all of your questions there?
Yes, Dustin, that was good.
Okay.
I just want to make a comment. When we were in our old churches, like a few churches that I was associated with, the lead pastors, they would avoid preaching from the book of Revelation. Like some even said that we don't need to, because I don't know, because I think it is very hard to interpret, or because there's so much of difficulty. But there's so much to learn, like the way you are teaching. So just wanted to comment on.
Yeah, I'm constantly amazed at how practical the book is, and I want to do whatever I can to help us to also draw Christian inspiration and motivation in our daily walk with Christ from it, because I think that's how the book was intended, and unfortunately the church at large has not made it easy for us to understand. So hopefully you've been able to be blessed by it. So okay, Dean has his hand raised.
Okay, this is going back just a little bit more clarification on what Rudy brought up on Revelation 12, verses 5 through 8. Again, this is a vision of the 12 tribes of Israel that apparently was shown to John to be adapted to concerning the redeemed of Christ. That's correct, right?
Correct.
So the vision was just, it shows the 12 tribes, but it names all the, it gives all the names of the 12 tribes, and that's where that kind of is confusing. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand that, but it's to say that, you know, I don't think we have confusion when Paul says that Christians, the body of Christ, is the Israel of God.
I agree with that, definitely.
But
I can see
it's
that.
the same thing. It's Israel is a combination of 12 tribes. So it's just another way of saying that the body of Christ identified with Jesus is the fulfillment of the people of God that God always wanted. But it's not defined by ethnicity or physical descent from Abraham. It's defined by being identified with the blood of Jesus and following after his ways.
Basically, what you're saying is, at least so far of what we've been covering in Revelation, this is all talking about Christians. But what about later, towards the end of the ending chapters? I'm getting ahead of myself, maybe, but that's also going to include the Old Testament believers.
Yes, but obviously, Revelation is written to New Testament people, and obviously the New Testament people of God have been included into the people of God, and the faithful Old Testament people of God are still a part of that people of God group. But obviously, Revelation's not written to the Old Testament people of God.
At least not so far. At least not so far, but then later on it's going to include them, isn't it?
Well, it talks about them, but it's not being written to them.
Okay. All right.
So it's the category is, we have the people of God. God has a people set apart for himself. How is that people defined? Okay. In the Old Testament, you might get the impression that the Old Testament people of God are defined by race, as in physical descent from Abraham.
Yeah.
In reality, you learn that if these people don't obey themselves and they're not faithful, then they get broken off of that.
Yeah.
And we learn that actually it's always been about grace and faith and faithfulness, and not about race.
Yeah. Jesus Christ taught that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Very clearly. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Good question. I admit that the messages in Revelation, boy, they could have been made clearer to us, but I think once we peel away all the layers of the imagery, I do think that the vision and the application is very, very powerful. So, and I hopefully walking away saying that we need to be pure and faithful and non-compromising in our walk as the bride of Christ is not too difficult to grasp. So, as I pointed out, those are things that Paul had said decades earlier. So, any other questions or comments? Daryl has his hand raised.
Yeah, I've heard through the years that 7 is a perfect number, 6 is the imperfect number, and different numbers being perfect and imperfect. What is the exegesis on that, and where do we actually hear? I mean, is there any kind of biblical definition that says this is a perfect number, this is an imperfect number, or is it just kind of assumed that? I mean, I've never really had any.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of places where you kind of like look in the Old Testament, you see how numbers are used. I mean, obviously, creation is perfected with 7 days. Not 10, not 6, not 4. So that's kind of the establishment of that. So anything less than that would be a cutting short of perfect. 6 is cutting short of 7. The number 12, that's always been a number dealing with the purposes of God, whether the 12 tribes or the 12 apostles. And so multiples thereof, like 144 is a multiple of 12. It just compounds it and how it works. 1,000 is just a nice big round number. That's also a number of completion. It's actually a multiple of 10, which is also kind of a number of completion. There is, I'm trying to remember, in one of the initial teachings that I did on this, I'd have to go back and look at which one it is. I think it's the second one, where I go through each of the numbers that are used in Revelation, because I talk about how Revelation gives its message. And it gives its message sometimes using numbers used symbolically. And if we don't know how the numbers are used symbolically, then we're not going to understand. It's like in our culture today, not to use a crude example, but if you got a child in the back seat, says they got to go to the bathroom. Someone says, well, what do you need to do? Do you need to go number 1 or number 2? Okay, well, we know what number 1, number 2 means. So those numbers are used symbolically, and we understand how that works. So we use numbers symbolically in our culture today, and they used it back then as well. So, but there's a lot of kind of Old Testament things. You'll find the number 7 used as a number of completion, actually pretty often in the Old Testament. If you're directly looking for it, you'll find it. You'll see it. But I would reference. I think it's the second teaching in our playlist where I go through and I give a lot of examples for it. So.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. It's a good question. Okay. Well, I will end the teaching here unless anyone else has anything they'd like to say. For those that are watching this on YouTube, we'd love to have you join us here in our virtual fellowship. Check out the description below the video for ways to get in contact with us, and hopefully you've been blessed by this in your Christian walk. Thank you for watching.